The story that you are about to hear is a compilation of documented true facts, featuring characters, events, or places that has played a role in shaping history. Please sit back and listen as I recite this narrative for you. Frank Wayne Sinatra, professionally known as Frank Sinatra Jr., born January 10, 1944, was an American singer, songwriter, actor, and conductor. He was the son of singer and actor Frank Sinatra and his first wife, Nancy Barbato Sinatra, the younger brother of singer and actress Nancy Sinatra, and the older brother of television producer Tina Sinatra. On December 8, 1963, Frank Sinatra Jr., the 19-year-old son of blue-eyed crooner Frank Sinatra and affectionately known as Junior, was kidnapped in Lake Tahoe, California. He was held captive for 54 hours by a motley crew of men who drove him around California in a Chevrolet, sometimes blindfolded in the back seat, sometimes in the trunk. Barry Keenan and Joe Amsler, both 23 years old, former grade school classmates of Junior's older sister Nancy, plotted to kidnap the famous crooner's son and hold him hostage for ransom. The boys had been following Junior's budding career, following in his father's footsteps, and assumed that Frank Sr. would pay a large sum for the safe return of his talented son. After failed attempts in both Arizona and Los Angeles, Keenan learned that Frank Jr. was on his way to Lake Tahoe, Nevada, to perform a concert before departing for Europe. Keenan and Amsler made the trip, knowing it was their last chance. Barry Keenan, the scheme's mastermind, had considered kidnapping Bob Hope's son, but decided against it because it would be un-American. So, he and his partners chose Frank Sinatra Jr. because they thought he'd be tough enough to handle the stress of a kidnapping, and because, given Frank Sr.'s history, it wouldn't be morally wrong to make him suffer for a few hours. Although the crime was originally scheduled for November, President Kennedy's assassination 2 weeks prior in Dallas delayed their plan. Keenan became addicted to Percodan, muscle relaxers, and tranquilizers after a car accident earlier that year caused a back injury and left him in chronic pain. His addiction had bankrupted him, so he devised a plan to kidnap Frank Jr. for ransom, which he said he would invest and then repay when he got back on his feet. Keenan and Amsler pretended to deliver a package to Frank Jr.'s hotel room at the Harris Club Lodge in Lake Tahoe. When Keenan pulled out a gun and demanded money from the duo, the young singer was eating chicken with John Foss, the trumpet player in his band. He and Amsler bound the band member with adhesive medical tape, blindfolded him because they weren't expecting him, and led Frank Jr. out to their car. As soon as Foss was untied, he called the cops. Roadblocks were set up, and the kidnappers were actually stopped by police. But they bluffed their way through and continued their hideout in a Los Angeles suburb. Junior was taken to Canoga Park, an area of Southern California's San Fernando Valley. Following his son's kidnapping, Frank received offers of help from Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy and Sam Giancana, one of the country's most powerful organized crime figures. He declined and instead accepted FBI assistance. They arrived safely at their Los Angeles hideout located 400 miles away, where Keenan called John Irwin, a 42-year-old house painter. Irwin, who had been involved in the planning but had not joined them in Tahoe, came to the outpost, and it was he who made the phone call to Frank Sinatra Jr. on December 10, demanding $240,000 for his son's safe release, despite Frank Sr.'s offer of a $1 million reward. Because the police believed, correctly, that the kidnappers were inexperienced, they advised the Sinatra family to pay the $240,000 ransom demand, as doing so would likely lead them to the perpetrators. The kidnappers revealed the ransom money drop point after a series of phone calls. The money was photographed by the FBI, before being dropped off at the designated drop location, a Texaco gas station in Sepulveda, California. The kidnappers demanded that all communication be conducted by payphone. During these conversations, Frank Sr. became concerned that he would not have enough coins, which prompted him to carry 10 dimes with him at all times for the rest of his life. He was even buried with 10 dimes in his pocket. The kidnappers planned to keep Junior hostage for as long as it took to get the ransom money, if not longer. But he was released after just over 2 days. Irwin became nervous as Keenan and Amsler went to get the cash from the Texaco. Rather than waiting for his associates to return with the money, he simply let Junior go. After walking a few miles and alerting a security guard, Sinatra Jr. was discovered in Bel Air. To avoid being photographed, he was placed in the trunk of the guard's patrol car and driven to his mother Nancy's house. Young Sinatra told FBI agents what he knew, but he had only seen 2 of the kidnappers and heard the voice of the third conspirator. Nonetheless, the Bureau tracked the clues back to Sinatra's house in Canogo Park and gathered even more evidence there. As the FBI's progress was reported in the press, the criminals felt the noose tightening around their necks. On his way to New Orleans, Irwin stopped in San Diego to see his brother, who proceeded to call the authorities after Irwin revealed his recent activities. Within a few days, one of Keenan's associates, John Irwin, turned himself into the FBI field office in San Diego and confessed to the crime. By December 14, all of the perpetrators had been identified and apprehended, and approximately $168,000 of the ransom monies had been recovered. On February 10, 1964, their trial began. Keenan testified that the crime was a hoax, a publicity stunt orchestrated by family members. Gladys Root, a flamboyant Los Angeles attorney, pursued this line of defense despite the lack of evidence to back up the accusation. That story would continue to surround the case for years after it was proven false. Even today, many believe that Junior had a hand in his own kidnapping. Some theorists claim that Frank Sr. staged the kidnapping as a publicity stunt, while others claim that it was real and staged by the mafia, with whom Sinatra had numerous well-known ties. The FBI and the courts determined that the kidnapping of Frank Sinatra Jr. was simply the poorly executed plan of 3 disgruntled people looking for a piece of the limelight. Though the case had the potential to end in tragedy, it quickly devolved into a media frenzy and became one of the most infamous and ridiculous kidnapping cases in history. Despite being convicted and sentenced to life in prison plus 75 years, Amsler and Irwin both served 3.5 years, while Keenan served 4.5. After being released from prison in 1968, Keenan went on to become a successful real estate developer. The Washington Post interviewed Keenan in 1998. He explained that he had convinced himself that the kidnapping would bring the strange Sinatra family back together and foster a ransom that would save his own family from financial ruin. Mastermind Keenan was later adjudged to have been legally insane at the time of the crime and hence not legally responsible for his actions. Columbia Pictures offered him and his co-conspirators $1.5 million in exchange for retelling the story for a film in 1999. Frank Jr. quickly filed a lawsuit to halt the transaction, citing a California statute that prohibits felons from profiting financially from the stories of their crimes. Keenan, who was in his late 50s at that time, claimed that the law violated his First Amendment rights. Frank Jr. won the case after a lengthy legal battle and several appeals. On This American Life in 2002, Keenan discussed the kidnapping with Ira Glass, and in 2003, David Arquette and William Macy starred in a Showtime film based on the affair called Stealing Sinatra. Operation Blue Eyes, a biopic about the kidnapping directed by Joe Mantegna, is also in the works. Amsler, a stunt double in Hollywood and a farmhand at times, died in Virginia in 2006. Irwin appeared to vanish after his release from prison. Frank Jr. died in 2016 when he was 72 years old.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to say that I am incredibly grateful that you took time out of your schedule to listen to my narration. This is Nikki of Twisted Mind, wishing you a great rest of your day. Salamat.